Two young children vanish at the hands of a carjacker, triggering a nationwide manhunt. Until the children's mother offers a stunning confession. Notorious woman number 4 is Susan Smith.
Who would ever imagine a mother killing two beautiful kids in such a horrific way?
October 25th, 1994, Union, South Carolina.
Shortly after 9 p.m., the 911 call had come in about a abductor taking a lady and her small children in a car and throwing her out and then proceeding on with the children.
Susan Smith was quick to describe the abductor to authorities. According to Susan, this was the man who abducted 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex.
The first sketch emerged showing the black male in the toboggan cap and a plaid shirt that she described.
She was really compelling because in terms of the description, down to the detail of the exact kind of jacket that he had on, the physical description, the face, the hair, everything.
I was trying to find the motive of why someone took her car on that particular night. I asked her, did the person say anything that I want your money? Did it mention the children directly? Or did the person touch you in any sexually offensive way? And she smiled and told me, no, it wasn't anything like that, which I thought was an inappropriate gesture at that time. That was the first idea I had, well, something's not right.
Though they were separated, Susan and her husband David Smith came together to pray for the safe return of their boys.
We love our children very much, and we want them returned to us safe and sound.
David seemed to be in shock. Susan, on the other hand, she was almost a little giddy about the media opportunity.
I would like to say to whoever has my children that they please bring them home.
The community immediately became involved in the search for the 2 little boys.
We started having people show up that offered help, wanted to look without riding on their own, looking at every road, at every pull-off to find those children still alive, because in October the temperatures were getting cold at night.
But privately, authorities harbored suspicions about Susan's story.
They gave both Susan and David a lie detector test. Immediately, David passed the test, but her test was inconclusive. That put up a red flag.
She said she was stopped at a traffic light, a red light, and there were no other cars there. Couldn't happen. 49 has a straight through green all the time unless another car is in the intersection that trips the light to change it. That was the first inconsistency we had that was solid that we could later use at the appropriate time.
Finally, after 9 days of searching from South Carolina to Washington State, there was a sudden and shocking break in the case.
I said, Susan, it didn't happen at a traffic light. She folded and dropped her head and asked if I would pray with her. And afterwards she said, you don't understand, my children are not all right. And I said, what do you mean? She says, I let them roll into the lake in my car. They're in the lake. And 118 feet out and about 18 feet of water, the car was there.
The sheriff dispatched a dive team to John D. Long Lake.
I remember one of the wildlife divers coming up and saying that he had put his mask up against the window and that he'd seen a hand.
The 2 toddlers were still strapped in their car seats.
There was no way for them to be able to try to survive or break free. They were pinned there, trapped there, and sent to a watery grave by their own mother, who they trusted and loved.
It was tough too, because you're pulling a car out with the wrecker and all the mechanics that entails, but this is these kids too. I saw a lot of grown men crying.
In a handwritten confession, Susan admitted she drove her boys to a boat ramp at the lake, where she got out of the car and released the parking brake.
She says that she was initially thinking of going into the lake with her kids, but then she didn't. And that must have been horrible, because when they hit that water, and that water was rising, they had to have woken up. And she had to have heard them screaming. And yet, she let it happen.
On November 3rd, 1994, Susan Smith was arrested and charged with the murders of her 2 children. At her arraignment that December, a plea of not guilty was entered on Susan's behalf. Prosecutors wanted the death penalty.
It was the very individual, beyond all others, that is arguably most tasked with protecting those children.
During the week-long trial, Susan's accusers offered a motive.
Tom Findley was a manager at the grocery store, and her husband David worked for him, and she had once had an affair with him before she was married. Then she continued the affair afterwards.
Shortly before she put the children on their last ride, she had received a letter from the boyfriend basically breaking it off. People like Susan Smith, they feel that their whole fantasy is being jeopardized by these two children. And they tell themselves, if I get rid of the kids, I'll get the love of my life back and everything will be fine.
The prosecution videotaped a reenactment of Susan Smith's car rolling into the lake, just as it had on the night Michael and Alex died.
The courtroom was packed. You could hear a pin drop. The video camera was mounted where the boys would be sitting. When you watch that video and you see that water, and you can't help but think what those boys were facing. That water was coming up. It just was going to cover it. That's a long time to be crying for mama.
The defense presented evidence that Smith had been molested by her stepfather as a child. But on July 22nd, 1995, a jury took just 2.5 hours to convict Susan on 2 counts of murder.
I'll never forget what Susan has done to me, to my family, and I'll never forget Michael and Alex.
She's eligible for parole in 2024. She won't get out because she's a cold-blooded, calculating murderer.
Coming up, the shocking story of sex and the serial killer. And later, most notorious woman #1.